Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a self publishing comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my creative process here live with you online. I, if you would like to support this channel, get bonus videos of my creative process and get bonus blog posts, more behind the scenes on my creation of comics and other artwork, you can go to patreon.com/Jeremy. If you'd like to sample some of the comic books that I make, get a look at the artwork that I'm seeing for free, you can go to comics.jeremy.net. There you can download free PDF previews of my comics. And if you would like to buy some of my comics, physical copies, or if you read them on Amazon Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That link will take you to my Amazon author page. So, today, figure drawing. For those of you who are new to my channel, figure drawing is very important to my creative process because I feel I'm still working to learn and grow as a creative, as a visual artist, aside from my actual writing and storytelling. To that end, I take figure drawing classes once a week at the Animation Guild in Burbank. And what I find is that getting in front of a live model once a week, a live figure drawing model, and actually analyzing the human form is one of the most educational things that's helped me improve as an artist and continues to help me learn and grow. The second most important thing is going over my bad drawings and trying to learn from them, to redraw them, to make corrections, to try and understand what are the anatomical places where I'm falling down, the things that I don't understand enough about, whether it's volume or anatomy, muscles, the skeleton, to go back to take a look at my work and just redraw it, draw over it. And so to that end, I saved some of my less than successful drawings from class, and I try to go over and work on them every once in a while. I haven't done that in a while, so and I'm in between sessions. We have a break between our spring session and our summer session of figure drawing classes, so I'm gonna miss having classes for a couple weeks. And in between that, it's even more important for me to stay on top of the figure drawing because I notice a big difference if I go a week or two without doing any figure drawing work. I see folks are already in the chat, popping up. I see Iron Rocks is there. Always good to see you, man. Mighty Geek Studios is in the chat too. Hey, what's going on, man? Good to see you. All right. So, I was going through my stack of drawings, and I see on this one, see Texmify is here in the chat too. How's it going? Let's bring the camera down a little bit. Let me grab my charcoal pencils and get settled in here. Just have to move some stuff around behind the scenes. The area around my drawing table is a little cluttered today. So, starting with, let me adjust this. And in fact, I'm going to need to move the camera a little bit more just because it's pressing against my drawing table right now, which means every time I bump my table, I'm going to bump the camera. So if I just move it around a little bit more and adjust it, you'll get less shaky cam action. It won't feel so much like the Cloverfield Artcast. And if you guys will excuse me, I'm going to step away from the camera for a second and blow my nose. Can you believe I'm still recovering from this long-ass cold? Some colds just won't die. All right. So, Mighty Geek Studio says, make a few character pinups. That's actually not a bad idea, to take some of the figure drawings and do them as character pinups. These drawings are actually from Mighty Geek. Do you ever take live figure drawing classes and actually work in front of a model? I love doing that. And there's certain things that I learned that I wouldn't have picked up even studying from either figure drawing art books or studying from photos. I think one of the things that This is something that was mentioned by my figure drawing instructor, Carl Ganas, who you can check him out at, I believe it's at Carl Ganas Studios on YouTube, or it might just be Ganas Studios. But if you look it up, it's GNASS. If you just type that in and you see Carl with a K, that's the guy. So he's got a YouTube channel. But one of the things that he mentioned, or has mentioned in the past in class, is that when you're doing master studies, or studying from another artist in general, studying their work, the thing about it is you're studying not just the drawing or the anatomy, but you're studying the choices that they've made. And, in terms of what muscles to show, what muscles to eliminate, and that is very important for your own education, because a lot of times when you're starting out and you're learning, you don't quite know how to make those decisions yet, how to make those changes and corrections. Now, when you're drawing, they kind of work hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. But when you're drawing from the live model, you have to make those choices. There's no one there making them for you. And a lot of times those choices will be bad choices, which is one of the reasons why I go back over my figure drawings and try to see where I went wrong. But when you compare that to, say, doing a master study from a Michelangelo drawing or Leonardo da Vinci, what you learn from those is you see the choices that they made and how they approached a figure, how they approach a certain piece of anatomy or a certain lighting situation. And so it's kind of a go back and forth. You look at the decisions that other artists have made about certain anatomical areas, and then you come back in and you try to make better decisions or try to copy their decisions. So it's not even that you're copying their anatomy, but you're literally copying their thinking and trying to understand, oh, this is how I depict a form receding into another muscle or an entire limb that's going away from you instead of, looking at it from a profile or a head-on shot. And it's sort of like being able to go back and forth between those two is incredibly helpful. So yes, I definitely like going and reworking my figure drawings. Now, the first thing I noticed when I sat down and started looking at this one was, pardon me, I noticed that in the foreshortening of this limb here, that I put a shadow in here that did not properly describe that the limb is kind of going away from us. So I erased the shadow that I had right in here. And I think this is one of those where I saw those muscles in the light, but I didn't properly draw what they were doing. So it's one of those where I was drawing what the muscle looked like instead of what the muscle was. If it makes any sense, when you look at just a volume, but you don't think about how the volume is turning in space, sometimes you tend to flatten it out and it doesn't describe what's supposed to be happening. So the overall form of this leg is that it's going away from us. It's going down and away. And so what I wanted to do is to start by coming in here and just lightly laying in a tone that's doing what the overall volume is doing, and see if that kind of helps it. And then come back in and sort of draw the muscle into that form. One of the things that I also like to do, and I may come back to this one, I may have to come up, instead of drawing on this, I may have to come up with a separate sheet of paper. And in fact, look at this now, I realize I need to put a couple of sheets underneath here because I'm drawing right on my board. And when you're drawing a newsprint with charcoal pencil, it's a little bit easier if you have paper, extra sheets of paper underneath, because having it on a surface that's a little bit softer, the paper just tends to take the charcoal a little bit better. So let's see here. The chat is pretty active, you guys. Thanks for showing up. Mighty Geek says yes, he has, and it's always fun referring to me asking whether he does goes to figure drawing sessions. And he says, I like seeing the way the body moves. Yes, movement is very important. It's not just the fact these people are static, but actually seeing how it twists and turns. I see Mighty Stag is in the chat. How you doing? Thanks for dropping in. Texmify says, I get my figures from real photos of models from Google. I also grab figures from comic books and other artists online. I learn from that and it improves my own art. Silent Stack says, I always miss your streams. Glad to catch one. Well, I'm glad you finally made it live. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there. I sometimes I get a little caught up when I'm drawing, just either talking about what I'm working on, and I focus on that. But I try to look up and check the chat every few minutes as I go. Mighty Geek says, I've noticed that most artists don't pay close attention to the way the skin expands and contracts. Yes, you're right. I think that's a matter of the level of subtlety that you're getting into, because I think that it explains a lot, it describes a lot. Looking at the skin sometimes, almost the way that fabric can expand and contract, the way that it pulls when the body stretches and compresses. But it also depends on the speed at which you're drawing, because sometimes catching those subtleties in a very simple drawing can be very difficult. I think that it takes a lifetime of study to make something that is very elegant or descriptive, but do it in a simple way. For instance, Alex Toth is one of those guys who, like Jack Kirby, is deceptively simple. He can do a drawing that looks almost like very, very simple, very, very graphic. Yeah, excuse me. Yet he can put very subtle anatomical details just by making a line, how, I don't know, an arm stretching and just having it go, like the outline go from thick to thin, a little bit sharper to kind of show that the pull of the clothing going from thick to thin, or like a muscle twisting. Those are very, very subtle, difficult things to communicate. And a lot of times, particularly if you're talking about comics, I don't know about you. For me, I do know that the speed at which I'm drawing greatly impacts the quality. I don't draw the same when I'm drawing at my fastest pace as I do when I'm taking my time laboring to really communicate. Taking the time to pull out reference for whether it's looking at an anatomy book, or if it's just me going and taking some photo reference of myself in the pose that I'm trying to draw. But little subtle things like that make a big difference between me just cranking a drawing out versus something that really feels like a quality piece of artwork to me. So mainly, I'm just trying to create a sense that this is both a rounded form and yet it has a bottom and underside to it. So even though it's rounding as a kind of a cylinder, I am giving it a little bit of a, it's not a full-on hard edge, but it's definitely an edge that's turning away from the light. It's one of the things that I still work on, is getting the subtle turns, because I think that it's pretty easy to draw something and go, here's an underside, here's a side form, here's the front form, and have one side that's darker, one side that's kind of facing away from the light, and then one that's facing directly in the light. But the transitions of doing something like a cylinder, they're simple, but putting those highlights in the right place and having the object turn from light to dark, and then maybe even having a small amount of tone on the opposite side as the object is turning away. Like, let's say the light is coming from here, so it's hitting this part. that still having a little bit of light just at the edge, or a little bit of shadow just at the edge, where it's turning away from the brightest form. These are things that are simple concepts, but to do them repeatedly and to have it be consistent all the way along the figure from top to bottom, and then also maybe making adjustments on places where rendering it exactly as it's depicted might confuse a certain muscle or piece of anatomy. To me, those are things that I still am constantly working on, constantly evaluating. And sometimes it's something where I'll draw it and I may have to step away from the drawing for a little while, maybe a few hours, maybe a few days, and I come back and look at it, and something that looked perfectly fine to me when I finished it, I'm like, oh wait, I did not see that before. Which is, again, one of the reasons why it's nice to come back to these drawings, weeks or months later, and reanalyze them and start seeing what it was that where I was going wrong with them. Pardon me while I blow my nose a little bit. Really sucks to be sick for such a long time. All right, let me pop back to the chat real quick. Let's see here. Amaris just popped in. She had to finish some concert art for her sister. Well, I'm glad you stopped by. Concept art. Well, I hope you had fun with it, and I hope it came out well. Travis Fredericks in the chat. What's up, Travis? Good to see you, man. Texmafy says I have a few art books from Stan Lee and from a few other artists that collaborated from the book. There's a section in it where it explains that when it comes to comic art, most of the features are exaggerated. Mighty Geek says you just hit another point with the shadows. Shadows soften the edges and make the drawing more fluid. Yes, it's very true. And I think that's another thing. I tend to draw, this is a criticism my instructor has given me, and it's valid. I tend to do much more sharp-edged work as opposed to really making things fluid and soft. That, for me, comes down to the fact that I'm constantly fighting my drawings feeling mushy. And a lot of times when I do work and it's soft from top to bottom, I lose the sense of structure. So for me, one of my big areas that I'm working on in terms of growth is to have some of that softness and fluidity while at the same time maintaining the level of structure. Because when I do go in more hard-edged with my work, I find that the figures have a lot of snap to them. They feel more dynamic, kind of more Kirby-esque. And for me, it's a matter of keeping that Kirby-esque dynamic snap while making the work feel a little bit more... Like, for me, a good example is someone like Claire Wendling or Eric Canetti, if you're familiar with their work. Claire Wendling's work is so fluid and so extremely graceful. And it feels dynamic, and it's both hard and soft at the same time. Incredibly elegant and powerful. And I think that that's one of those things where it's something to aspire to, having her work exist in the world as an example to other artists, that you can combine the graceful softness of, say, like a Bouguereau, even though her work I don't think really looks like Bouguereau, but I think it definitely has Bouguereau's elegance. You can combine that level of elegance in drawings and illustration with that dynamic poppy snap that comes from animation and comics. Oh, but in terms of features feeling exaggerated, the comic Texmafy, sorry, I'm butchering the name a little bit. Well, I think that, again, when it comes to exaggeration versus realistic illustration, that is a matter of style. Because if you look at the comics of like the 50s and 60s, because I think in the 70s, during the Neil Adams era is when you start getting a lot more realism in comics. And part of this was just the production line process, not just of having the job split up into penciler inker, letterer, colorist. But in terms of the pace at which comics were being cranked out, nowadays in contemporary comics, you'll have artists working, instead of working on 12 issues a year, you'll have an artist maybe work on 6 or 8 issues, and they'll have it a particular comic series broken up between 2 or 3 artists, or maybe one artist and then like another fill-in artist that will maybe do a couple of short stories in between, while that artist is not even taking a break, but they've been doing so much work at such a high level of detail that it'll give them a chance to catch up and keep the book on schedule. And I think that that's something that is forgotten when you compare the comics, contemporary comics, to comics of the 50s and 60s, is that there were artists that were definitely capable of drawing the level of detail that we see in contemporary comics. They just weren't given the schedule to do it. I mean, when you talk about Kirby doing, 10 pages a day, in some cases 20 pages a day, at the extremes, we forget that as much as I love Kirby's artwork, a lot of times it didn't have the level of rendering that, say, Olivier Coipel has, or Jim Chung, artists that are very detailed. And he was capable of doing artwork of that level of detail, but that's not what he was asked to do. He was asked to crank out a shit ton of pages very quickly. I'm not sure if there's a whole lot more that I wanted to... Oh, actually, no, I do realize there was also... I might as well just keep working on this and work my way up and down the figure. One of the things I was thinking about doing when I finish this is, instead of moving on to another figure, is to go over here and get another sheet of paper and just draw the skeleton of this pose, because that's another thing that I find very handy, and particularly when I'm struggling with a pose, is to look at the underlying anatomy, to pull out an anatomy book and look at just the skeleton. I think I've shown this before in the past, but I have a little drawing above my drawing table. I keep this as a reminder whenever I'm having trouble with anatomy, that if I'm having a pose and it's not working right, to actually draw the bones and the skeleton, to look in, and that a lot of times makes me realize, oh, the reason why this looks weird is because I'm twisting the form in a way that the bones don't actually go, and then I can properly understand, oh, well, if the bones go this way, then the muscles are actually wrapping around in this manner instead. So again, pardon me, recovering from the cough that won't die. See here. Mighty Geek Studios says, oh, and this is in reference to shadows and softer forms. He says that's why female characters have more shadows than their male counterparts. Yes, the fluidity, the rhythms and curves of the body. When you have something that's turning away from the form and has more rounded edges to it, it's going to have more shadows. Texmify says, have you ever thought of doing a live stream drawing of a demon or a monster from Morningstar? Well, yes, I have. And I do intend to do that. In fact, the pieces that I had been drawing, I was working on, I had been working on thumbnails for the cover to the final issue of Morningstar, but I'm also going to do those as finished illustrations, because I think they would make nice art prints, and I think they would make some nice drawings. And I also intend to do smaller black and white versions of it, and then eventually do color versions that are going to be both. I'm going to consider doing maybe a painting, and I don't know if the painting is going to be for the final actual cover illustration, or whether I'm going to do that digitally or traditionally, or I may just do a painted version that's small just to sell as an original at conventions. But if you want to see what I've been up to on that end, yeah, so I had shown you guys these over the past few weeks, the different cover thumbnails. So I'm going to go ahead and do well, these aren't actually demons per se, it's Lucifer. But there's going to be some demons in the backgrounds of this. You know what? I have a sketch. My desk is littered with sketches of things that I want to work on and draw. Let me just see if I can find this one little thumbnail for an idea that I wanted to do. So a lot of times before I really dig into doing all of those thumbnail studies that I do, I will start, like my ideas start with a super rough, just me sketching just to get an idea down. So this is Isbaal from Morningstar, the Queen of the Demons. And what I wanted to do was do a sketch, and this is one that I am going to do as a standalone illustration. It's going to be her holding the face of a horse, and I may actually have her with resting her head against the horse. But I like to do things where I kind of juxtapose and put together something beautiful with something creepy. And what I wanted was to have, I may change the pose to actually have her head resting against the horse's head in the type of pose that you might see in a piece of fantasy artwork, or like with I don't know, a princess or an elven forest spirit, a naiad or something like, not naiad, I think those are ocean spirits, a dryad, or some sort of forest, spirit or fairy, like pressing their head against a horse or a unicorn, something like that. But what I think was unique about this, and I'll have to see if I can work out the expression on the horse, because horses have very expressive eyes. But what I wanted to do was not draw it where it's like there's a monster curling up with this horse and it's freaking out. What I wanted was to have the horse very calm, very peaceful. And I don't know if I can communicate this in a drawing, but I almost have the horse look loving. And to me, what's interesting about that is that you have this thing that in the books you're scared of her. She's a monster. And to have this horse, this animal feeling very at home, very comfortable, if not comforted by her. And I feel like that creates sort of an unsettling contrast between how the other angels interact with her in terms of having this battle, constantly fighting with her, she's killing them, versus a horse just curled up with her. And for me, that's what's unsettling about the image. It's not that it's an image of a monster, but it's a monster that's being completely accepted by nature and almost, adored by nature. So that is an illustration that I want to do. I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to do it right away, particularly because, yes, as much as I have all these ideas for illustrations I want to do for Morningstar, I really should finish that last issue. So I may only draw one or two of these cover pieces before the show. Before I have, oh, by the way, that's the other thing. If you are in the Las Vegas area, if you're somewhere near Las Vegas, if you're in Arizona or somewhere in Utah, somewhere in the Southwest, I'm going to be doing a show in Las Vegas. I'm going to be at the amazing Las Vegas Comic-Con, June 14th through 16th at the Las Vegas Comic Convention. I don't know if I have my Artist Alley table yet. My table number. I already have a table. I don't know it off the top of my head, but if I do if they've already given me my table assignment, then I will post that either in the comments for this video or I'll post it on the community section of my channel. So I'll have to look and see if I have that information so I can share that with you guys. But my point is that if you are out in the area, if you're going to be going to that show or you're thinking about going to convention, if it's something that you want to do and it's not too far of a drive for you, I'd love to see you guys. As my wife will sometimes say, I get a little bit too carried away in talking at comic conventions instead of focusing on actually selling books and artwork. But I do love just hanging out and meeting other artists, other creatives, and talking shop, talking creative process, talking about learning, all of that, comics, whatever movies you're watching. So yeah, if you're out in the area, if you're going to make it to the show, please come look for me. I'll definitely be posting my table location before the show starts. Pardon me again, blowing my nose. This really sucks. I'd rather just be able to talk and talk and talk and talk to you guys without having to stop and do this. And then I will take another look at the chat real quick. I think actually all this talking, for some reason, makes my nose run a little bit more. All right, so chat. Mighty Geek says it will come down to how you draw the horse's eyes in terms of that illustration for of Isbaal. Yeah, horses have very expressive eyes. Fortunately, there is a lot of horse reference online, so it will be, I can find ample reference. It's more of finding a horse that has the expression I want at the angle I want, or if there isn't an image that I can directly copy, then to at least find a horse that has an expression that I want and then translating it to the pose that I want to use. So, yeah, I'm definitely, the longer I work as an artist, I think that I'm getting a better handle on using reference, because for many years, I didn't use reference because I thought reference was just copying what's in front of you, when really it's a matter of being able to find an example of how something should look and then learning how to adapt it to the concept you're actually illustrating. Draw to Write asked what time, and I presume that's what time is the convention that's going to be in Las Vegas. I want to say that on Friday the show opens at, I know it doesn't open at noon. I think it probably opens at 2 on Friday. I think it's like 2 to 8. And then the rest of the days, it's, I think, 10 to 6 on Saturday and Sunday. So, yeah, and I'll be at the show all 3 days during the entire day. So here, I think the important thing that I'm missing in this drawing is the actual transition between the trapezius muscles and the deltoid, because it's got to be coming out of the neck, down, and then back up. And I guess I'm kind of trying to create the way that the shoulder will round over this region. Because I feel like I want to correct this a little bit. And this is one of those things where I may have been trying to draw exactly what was in front of me, what the model looked like, instead of adjusting it for clarity. Because this is one of those where I realize now, if I drop the trapezius a little bit, you can get the fact that it's coming down out of the neck. Because the way I originally drew it, it just feels like it's just, the neck is going up, and it feels like the neck has bat wings to it, instead of actually feeling like there's a neck and then a muscle growing out of the neck. And it may well be that the model I was drawing, if I'm remembering correctly, may have had a thicker neck, but it certainly wasn't to the point. I mean, no one has a neck where it's just like the trapezius feels like it's one giant. The trapezius being the muscles that come out from the side of your neck and attach to the shoulder, these muscles here. And then running down the back. And I don't want it to sound like I'm making excuses. A lot of times, if we're drawing a model and it's only like a 8-minute pose, there are a lot of anatomical subtleties that sometimes I realize I may not be getting. Like, for instance, when I started here, most of the upper portion of this figure was unfinished. And that's mainly because I had just decided, in the amount of time we had in the pose, let me just work on the lower limbs. I just put my focus into working on the thighs and calves and the pelvis, and I just left the upper body mainly unfinished. And there's only so much time that you have, and sometimes when you're in a figure drawing class, you just kind of have to say, all right, let me get in enough that I understand where the whole figure is, and then pick the area that you want to work on. I mean, it would be nice to do, and it depends on what you're doing. Like, if you're doing gesture drawing, the point is to get the entire figure down in a simple manner. But in the particular class that I was taking, this one was longer poses. So the idea was, once you get your gesture down, take your time, pick an area, and just work on rendering the forms, the volumes. Draw to Write says, will you ever come to any conferences in the SF Bay Area? I would like to make it back to the Bay Area again sometime soon. The first 2 years of the San Francisco Comic Con, I went up there and I had a great time. But sales-wise, I didn't make as much as I would have liked the second year. And it's not that that's the only reason why I go to the show. I go to the show to meet other people and to share my work. And I do want to make it back to that show and other shows in the Bay Area again. That said, this year I'm only doing 2 comic conventions. There was WonderCon in Anaheim, which already happened, and there's this show in Las Vegas. And the reason why I'm doing fewer shows is simply because it's taken me so long to finish Morningstar, and I really want to. It's not that I'm sick of working on that comic, but I've got one issue left. I've been drawing this series for several years, and I'm putting it out at only like 1 or 2 issues a year. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I feel like I would rather do fewer conventions and publish more comics than I would doing like, 6 or 8 conventions every year, but only putting out like maybe 1 issue every other year. And you would be surprised how much time it takes out of your schedule, both the prep that you have to do leading up to a convention and then all the stuff you have to do afterwards before you even are able to get back to your regular schedule. And sometimes it's just a matter of you need some rest and you're kind of exhausted from doing these conventions. So I really do find that to a certain degree, it's kind of, I really enjoy doing conventions. I really enjoy meeting people in person, but it is very disruptive to me actually finishing artwork. So I said for the next year or so, I'm going to cut back on conventions and just focus on, making stuff. And that said, I don't think that this live stream can make up for actually meeting somebody in person. But I do feel like I talk to a lot more creative people here online, fellow creators, fellow artists, the kind of conversations that I would have at comic conventions. I feel like since I've been doing these live streams, I've been doing a lot more of that over this past year. And I feel like I'm getting a lot of the personal benefits for me in terms of actually engaging with other creators or people that are just fans of artwork. I feel like I'm getting a lot of those benefits by doing these live streams. So, and you know what? That could just be my imagination. People are like, dude, no one's seeing you. We want you to come to shows. First off, I'd be lucky if anybody cares enough about my work that they're like, hey, we missed you. You wanted to come. So I'm glad you even asked, Draw to Write. That's very flattering. I do want to make it back to the Bay Area. While I don't have anything on schedule next year, I would like to think that sometime in 2020 when I have more time to, once I get Morningstar wrapped up and I'm like, all right, I'm going to do maybe 4 or 6 shows a year, that I'll be able to find a show in the Bay Area, whether it be the San Francisco Comic-Con, whether it's some other show up in the Bay Area. But yes, I will eventually make it back to the Bay Area. And I'm sorry it's been so long since I've been there. All right, back to the chat. Mighty Geek Studios says, watch Lady Death animated movie. For most of the references you might need, you can find it on YouTube. I assume that's talking about horses. We tend to merge, and also in terms of, talking about figure drawing and I guess simplification. We tend to merge things when given a set amount of time. Yes, I find that most of the classes that I take, we don't have like 20-minute poses or some classes you'll do something where you do a whole pose for 3 hours and the model just takes breaks. She'll mark on the stand with tape where her hands were, where her feet were, so that way, like after the model comes, because models have to take breaks. It is grueling and demanding to do poses to be posing for 25 minutes at a pop, regardless of whether you're doing one pose or 20 poses. But definitely, if they're just doing one pose for the whole class, there can be serious circulation problems if they don't actually get up and move around. You do nerve damage to your body depending on how you're resting, where your weight is resting. So it's very important for models to be able to take breaks. But I ramble. My point being that most of the classes, the models are doing maybe anywhere from 5 to 8 minute poses. Sometimes we'll do 10s and 15s, and if we're particularly doing a class that is focused on maybe anatomy and doing more detail, then occasionally we'll do like a 25-minute pose. We'll do one pose for the whole session, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time we're doing shorter poses, and that either means doing the entire figure to a lesser level of detail, or it means drawing out like a rough sketch of the whole figure and then say, all right, I'm just going to work on the pelvis or the torso, or I'm going to work on one arm or one leg, and just working out as much detail as you can get in that area. So, all right, let me grab another pad, a separate pad of newsprint, and I'm going to work on drawing the skeleton of this pose. All right. Pardon me for a second. All right, some more newsprint. Let me pop back up. Chat. Where's my chat? Okay. Travis says, who are your art influences? And Texmify says, I was wondering, aren't you self-published? That's an easier question. Yes, I am self-published. Yeah. I don't have anything against working for publishers, but I've never actively sought publishers out. And a big part of that is because I'm not working on comics full time. I think that if I were working full time and I was turning out a lot of work, then it would be worthwhile for because the idea of working with a publisher, it's not like, oh, all publishers are out to screw over creatives and take your intellectual property. And it's not all publishers are there to just do everything for you so you can just sit and draw. It has to be, the best situation should be something that's mutually beneficial for both creator and publisher. That said, one of the things that is important is the pace at which you put out work. And right now, I'm not in a position where I would be necessarily making enough I wouldn't be making as much as I make at my full-time job. My day job, I work as a toy designer, and I'm very, very fortunate to have a day job that is creative. So the comics I do because I love comics. I've always loved comics and I'm super passionate about it. And I don't think I'm ever going to stop making it. But that said, for me, the self-publishing is about the fact that it allows me to make comics at my own pace. I don't think there's really any publishers that it's useful to be able to produce like one issue a year. You really, if someone was producing a graphic novel a year, I think a publisher could say, all right, our business is mainly graphic novels, let's just do that. So for me, the self-publishing, yes, I enjoy the control of self-publishing, the fact that I get to make all of the creative decisions. That does not mean that I would never work with a publisher. It just means I'm not actively seeking one right now, and I'm happy doing the self-publishing. So now, okay, I thought that was the shorter answer, even though I rambled a bit. Oh, while I'm doing this, I should probably pull up, where's my reference book? I have not just multiple figure drawing books, but I have multiple books on anatomy. But this one, when I'm doing anatomical studies, is usually my go-to, Atlas of Human Anatomy for the Artist, by Stephen Peck. So let me just pull up the back skeleton here. Oh, but my art influences. So, excuse me. I would like to say that I have 3 layers of references. My first layer is in terms of actual visual storytelling and pacing. That would be Frank Miller, Walt Simonson, John Byrne. Those were the comic creators when I first started reading comics that I really gravitated to. I would say probably John Byrne and Walt Simonson were my early favorites. One of the first comics I ever... I'd already started buying comics on my own. I was reading like Transformers and G.I. Joe because I was a kid of the 80s. But I went to when I started going to actual comic book shops, I just pulled up this page here with a little bit of a anatomical reference, just so, I'm looking at this while looking at that, because you're not going to be able to see the reference off to the side. So I'm looking at the 2 of these as I try to translate this into a skeleton. But Walt Simonson has a series called Star Slammers. And originally it was something that was published by Marvel, had a imprint called Epic Comics. And I can't remember if it was published by Epic or whether it was just considered a Marvel graphic novel. But it's a great science fiction series. They've also published it from Dark Horse. I think IDW may be publishing it now. But I remember my local comic shop had a raffle. I'm gonna adjust the scale of this so that I'm gonna draw this smaller than I would normally draw it, but that's so that I can keep the full drawing on the page. Usually, a lot of times, I will make a line, kind of like a composition line, and I can just decide, oh, I want the drawing to end here, and then from here I can work in, say, all right, work in the half, the torso, kind of at the midpoint, the line between the torso and the legs, and then just work in all the proportions within that. But anyway, Walt Simonson, Star Slammer. They had a raffle at my local comic shop when I was a kid. I won that Star Slammer's graphic novel, and to me, it was one of the most influential books I've ever read. I still own it to this day. For me, it was better than Star Wars. I loved it, and it was this amazing, rich science fiction story with characters I'd never heard of, but just immediately just fell in love with and wanted to read more. And that book, I say more than almost any other book I've read, taught me at an early age the power of comics as a storytelling medium. John Byrne, I discovered his work. Most people either discovered him through the X-Men, his X-Men run, or Fantastic Four. I am a weirdo. My John Byrne experience what pulled me into his work, and I've read some of, not all, but I've read some of his Fantastic Four work. I've read a lot of his X-Men work, but for me, it was his run in the uh, in the '80s on West Coast Avengers, which is a book where the Avengers, basically Hawkeye, moves out to LA, starts his own Avengers team. It's not a book that I think was necessary. I don't know if it was beloved. It was before Wizard Magazine was out, so I don't really know how other people were reacting to it. But all I know is I, just from reading that book, just was completely into like Wonder Man, and Hawkeye became like my favorite Avenger. Scarlet Witch was on the team. It was just a great comic. I loved it. And then with Frank Miller, really all you got to say is Dark Knight Returns. I don't know if that was the first Frank Miller comic that I had read, but it was the first thing that I heard other comic fans talking about, saying, "Oh, you've got to read this." And I read Dark Knight Returns, loved it, then went on to find Ronin. I'm sure that there were some other Frank Miller books that I had read in the interim, because I really feel like there was something before Dark Knight Returns that I had been exposed to. But the point was, by the time I came into comic shops and reading comics, people were already talking about Frank Miller. He was like, "Oh, you need to read this guy. You need to check out his work." I can, even though I don't own the issues, I can remember when he started doing Sin City and Dark Horse Presents. I do happen to have the first few issues of Dark Horse Presents that had or I think Dark Horse had published a San Diego Comic Con special that had the first appearance of Hellboy, and I do have that somewhere in a box in my folks' house. Let me come back up and go back to the comments real quick, because there's more. I was gonna say that I have other layers of studying art influences. But let's see. Mighty Geek, when I was talking about self-publishing, he says that's what I like about self-publishing. I assume the control that you have, being able to do whatever you want, do it at the pace that you want. Just generally control. It's a big deal. Iron Rocks says, "Me too, bro." Burn, Walt Simonson. Mighty Geek says, "For those interested in doing pinups, keep a copy of Playboy on hand for a reference when drawing female characters." I find this is again going back to figure drawing. One of the reasons why I prefer drawing from live models as opposed to drawing from Playboy models. And I'm not saying that's a bad practice. I'm not contradicting you. I think that superhero comics, they're meant to be idealized. They're fantasies, and so it makes sense to use something like Playboy, using that for reference. That said, I do feel that there's a tendency to over-exaggerate unnatural body ideals. I do like the way that natural, like real women, come in a wide variety of body types and body shapes, and I don't think you necessarily get that variety in Playboy or in other glamour magazines. So while I do think it's useful to have something like that as reference, I feel that it would probably behoove. I mean, if you're doing pinups, then yes, you're idealizing women. I would say looking at someone like Gil Elvgren, who a lot of his work was, published in Playboy. He's a good girl pinup artist. Does beautiful women. I'd say that he's a good one to look at. But also, again, going to actual figure drawing classes and drawing a wide variety of male and female body types. I think that it's useful in general in comics to have more wide varieties of body types and different looking people. So that's, personal opinion. It's just personal opinion. In terms of, let's see. Iron Rocks says, "I loved Simonson's work on Thor." Yes, I do have the. I didn't read the original ones coming up, but I have the Marvel Masterworks that has the Beta Ray Bill saga in it. That was a great story. I love that. And Bird on X-Men. I have I got I think they actually used to have a comic called Classic X-Men in the 80s, which was reprints of the Byrne Claremont run they were just reprinting them because they were out of print, and it was before you could get trades of almost every comic series out there. I'm really not paying much attention. This is the downside. Now that I'm talking, I'm not paying as much attention to this figure as I should be. And it's almost like I forgot that I'm drawing the skeleton. But one of the things I'm trying to remember here is the subtle turn. As opposed to doing her bones, this thigh is actually turned so that this actually probably shouldn't be curving as much. It should probably be coming down straight a little bit more. I've got it turned a little too much. But my point being is that this thing is, as opposed to, I'm trying to think of an easy way to explain this. Where's my Mr. Bones? More influence talk in a second. But one of the things that I noticed as I was drawing this, I started drawing it with just, with like this, with the thigh going out to the side and then curving back so that the foot, see how the foot is turned this way? What the model was actually doing is the model had her hip, and this, because of the way that this is attached, I can't twist the hip the way that I want to. But what she actually was doing is her body was upright, but she had her hip twisted such that instead of going like this, it was like this, and with the leg coming back this way. And that changes that you're seeing more of the underside of everything. And that was one of the things that I realized when I was drawing the actual version with the full flesh. That's one of the challenges I had, is I was drawing this a little bit too much like you were seeing the side of the hip, which you would see if it was turned more like this, when you were really seeing the underside of, I mean, not hip, the underside of her thigh. I was drawing the side of her thigh instead of more of the underside of her thigh when I originally drew the model. And that's one of the things I was trying to fix in this one. I was turning that in there. And those subtle things, like understanding what's going on with the muscles, is helpful and useful for that. That's one of the reasons why I like doing things like this, where I like going at this and saying, all right, what's going on with the skeleton underneath? So when I was in high school, I was very big into Byrne, Simonson, Miller. When I got into college, now, one of the biggest art influences that I have, which leads to my next level of kind of creative, interesting growth, was Bill Sienkiewicz. Now, there's a reason why my work I don't think it really shows much of Bill Sienkiewicz's influence. But I was, beyond Byrne and Simonson, I have pretty broad tastes. Some people only like one type of artist, or some people only like manga. I liked realistic artists. I like cartoony artists. I wasn't reading Jeff Smith's Bone at the time, but he's another artist that I like. I have pretty wide variety of tastes in terms of like from cartoony to realistic. Like, I do remember reading Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek's Marvels series, and also Alex Ross and Mark Waid's Kingdom Come, which came out a few years later, which is very, very realistic in terms of their artistic style. One of the things I loved about Bill Sienkiewicz was that he showed me I didn't necessarily have to choose a style. He could do, on a single comic book page, he could do something that was very painterly. And he could do just something that's almost graphic and cartoony, like a Ralph Steadman. Then he could do something that I also saw, just 'cause I don't want you to think I'm falling asleep on it. I see Mighty Geek mentioning Jim Steranko. He could do something that's Steranko-esque. And he could do this not from page to page. We could have this from panel to panel. Just this beautiful like way he would transition from one style to another. And that led me to artists that had sort of a multimedia taste to it. Sienkiewicz was the first and the most influential in that. but then I grew into being interested in guys like Dave McKeon, who most people I think know him for his covers to the original run of Sandman, but he also did a lot of great sequential comics as well. He has a series that he wrote and drew called Cages, which I think is still one of my all-time favorite comics to date. But that led me down a path in terms of artists that didn't necessarily let themselves be pigeonholed into one particular style or media. That led me to David Mack from Kabuki fame. I really love his work as well. And then eventually, I fell into Ashley Wood's work, which Ashley Wood, I love his work, but in a way, it's bittersweet to me. I very, very much love his work. I'm very much a fan of his work. The reason why I say that my fandom of his work is bittersweet is because when I was in college, that was when I really became a fan of Ashley Wood. And I was not able to draw well enough to draw like how I wanted. I wasn't able to draw what I saw in my head. I couldn't draw well enough to draw images the way I saw them. But when I discovered Ashley Wood's work, I immediately fell in love with it. But the reason why is because his work is what I saw my artwork growing into. Now, that's bittersweet because, yes, obviously I'm going to be drawn to somebody who draws the type of work that I want to make. But I was already, after being a fan of comics in like high school, it was definitely frowned upon to ape another artist's style. And that put me in this question of, all right, well, if somebody's already doing what I want to do, then where does that leave me? What do I become if someone else is already doing what I'm doing? How can I be Ashley Wood if Ashley Wood's already Ashley Wood? And that was something that it took me, I don't know, a while. I struggled with that probably for a couple of years. And I think that the way I came out of that was probably around the time that I started taking figure drawing classes regularly. And I realized what Bill Sienkiewicz, David Mack, and Ashley Wood all had in common, which was that they did very expressionistic artwork. But the reason why they could exaggerate and distort and do expressionistic executions of the human figure and form was because they knew how to draw so well that they could go off the reservation, as it were, without, they could convince you of something that might be an abstraction or a exaggeration of the human form, but they had enough mastery over it that they could make it convincing to you. And that's when I realized, oh, I just don't know how to draw well enough. That was like a big light bulb moment for me. So then I said, all right, well, I'm taking these figure drawing classes. I'm trying to learn how to draw. Who do I want to look at in terms of wanting to draw better? And then my art influences went from comic book guys to illustration educators. And that's when I really got into Andrew Loomis, George Bridgman. I was aware of Walt Reed, although I hadn't really looked at his work as much. But I would say that was the point when I really got into Bridgman and Loomis. And those were my two in terms of art education. Well, there's three, because there's Bridgman, there's Loomis, and there's Carl Ganas, who I continue to study with. And I would say that, I'm leaving out a very important art influence. And I even mentioned this. I have an art book that I published that's available on my Amazon page. And in it, there's a section where I call it the two Carls. Because one is Carl Ganas, who I've been studying with for many years now. And I would say that he taught me how to analyze. And I think that more important than someone just teaching you how to draw a thing is teaching you how to learn to teach yourself. And I would say that was probably the biggest thing I took away from him. Like, he gave me a great love for figure drawing that when I first started taking figure drawing classes, I was looking at it more like it was a necessary, I don't want to say necessary evil, but I wasn't in love with figure drawing when I started taking those classes. I just thought, I want to make better comics. This will help me get there. Now, if I had to stop making comics, I would be heartbroken. But if I was allowed to continue studying the human figure, doing figure drawing, taking figure drawing classes the rest of my life, I would miss comics, but I wouldn't feel like, oh, I don't want to make art anymore. There's enough just in learning to draw the beauty of the human form that's interesting to me that I could spend the rest of my life just studying anatomy and studying gesture and studying the flow and the volumes. There's so much, and there's never a point where I feel like I'm going to master it. So that's a huge gift that he gave me. The other Carl is my friend, Carl Altstetter. He is a comic creator who I worked with. He also works in the toy industry, but I worked with him. I was working on a cartoon series called Alien Racers, and I had done some of the story development for that toy, for the toy line, and it was going to come with a package with a comic book that I wrote, and I drew the first one. And I must tell you, like, I think most comic creators will have like an early work that they did that's out in public that they're like, I am not proud of this. I don't think this is my best work. That Alien Racers comic would probably be that piece. I really don't think it is of a professional quality, but they ran with it. But it became very clear early on in that series that I was not going to be able to continue my toy design duties, my storytelling duties for the cartoon series, and also just do, like, I wasn't going to be able to continue to do this work. We needed somebody who specialized, who drew comics. And so we brought Carl in, we looked at his portfolio, thought his work was great, and we hired him. But it wasn't until we had been working together for a few weeks when I realized he showed me a copy of another book that he had done. And it's a series called Q Unit. I had read Q Unit when I was in high school. They gave away like the Q Unit Zero issue in Hero Magazine for those old school hats who remember Hero Magazine, which was kind of like a competitor to Wizard in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, Carl had I remember seeing the Zero issue of that and then saying, oh, I have to get this comic. And I remember getting the first issue that was published by Harris Comics. And then for contractual reasons, there was a whole lot of hoopla and a lot of legal entanglements that kept them from ever publishing the rest of the series. But I remember loving that book and being sad that I never, got to see the rest of it. And so here I am working with a guy who drew a book that I loved. And Carl and I have become very good friends over the years, but he has been an incredible mentor to me. And for somebody who was way more experienced, he never talked down to me as a comic creator. He always treated me as an equal, even though he was far more experienced, far more capable as a draftsman and as a storyteller. And he was encouraging and nurturing at times when I didn't deserve it, because I am stubborn and I'm hard-headed, and there are things that he tried to tell me. Like, he spent probably a good 6 months, if not a year, trying to get me into the habit of flipping my drawings. So for those who don't know, if you have a drawing and you either put it on a light box and you flip it over so that you're looking through the light box at the mirror image of it, or if you flip your drawings, if you're drawing digitally and you're in Photoshop, when you look at the mirror reflection of your drawing, you can see way more of your flaws that you might not see just because we're used to perceiving the world a certain way. And a lot of times you won't see those mistakes because they're just your natural blind spot. But when you look at the mirror image of it, they jump out at you. You can't help but see. And then you're like, oh, wow, I really need to fix that. I didn't realize that was that bad. Other people can see it, but you can't see it. That's just an example of one of the things that Carl tried to teach me, and I resisted for a very long time. And we joke about it because to this day, it's the one thing that he and my wife have in common. Well, no, they have a lot in common. They're both people who care about me. But I joke about it whenever whenever my wife does it, I will mention Carl, or whenever Carl does it, I'll mention it to my wife, that there's some shit that they were telling me like years ago, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and I just never listened, because it still happens to this day. But the point is that Carl's a great friend. He was very patient. He has and continues to teach me a lot about comics, art, visual storytelling. If you live out in Southern California in the Inland Empire, I think he's at the Comic Revolution convention in Ontario, California this weekend. it should still be going because in LA it's it's a little after 12 o'clock. I'm sure the show will be going until probably 5. So if you're out there in near Ontario, California, go say hi to Carl. Tell him Jeremy sent you, and tell him Jeremy said thank you for sharing everything, even though he has and continues to be a stubborn ass. But yeah, they are still. Wow, I really went off on a long jag there. Let me go back up to the chat here. And by the way, we're at 70 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and run through responding to you guys, and then we're gonna wrap it up. So Ion Rocks also says Steranko is awesome. Texmafy says in middle school, anime style was was a cancer. Everyone was doing it. Then they had the nerve to talk down on. Whoops, hang on. Whoops, the chat disappeared on me. Then they had the nerve to talk down on American comic art. It pushed me to learn American comics. I can't remember who it was I was talking to. Oh no, I was talking with my coworker Rob. But we were talking about artwork in general, and we were saying, what is my art fueled by? And I said, spite. It may not be healthy, but telling people to go screw themselves can be one of the most powerful motivators for an artist. And whatever gets you to up your level and raise your game, as long as you can take those negative emotions and turn it into something positive, I think that's the most important thing. Iron Rock says, I think this is talking about manga. LOL, I didn't care. I do what I want. As well, you should. I'm not saying that people shouldn't draw in manga, but I think it can be bad when everyone is doing a style just to do a style. And I think that's one of the things I had mentioned in that large range of influences in this influence talk is, going from Byrne, Simonson, and Miller to Bill Sienkiewicz to David Mack to Ashley Wood to George Bridgman to Andrew Loomis. And also, one of the things is I started trying to move back from because a lot of this stuff in terms of Bridgman and Loomis, that's in terms of like illustration in general and basic just general draftsmanship. Then I started saying, well, who are comic creators that I think have the best draftsmanship? And for me, the two that really jump out, and there's a third artist that I'm forgetting. I mean, there's lots of artists that have great draftsmanship, but the two that I specifically focused on were Mark Schultz, the creator of Xenozoic Tales, also Cadillac and Dinosaurs, for those who knew the cartoon, that's what it was known as. Mark Schultz, and then Brian Stelfreeze, who I'd always been aware of, but I mostly knew him as a painter because most of what I saw, it wasn't until I started looking into his work that I saw his sequentials. For the most part, I just knew him as the guy who did the cover artist for Shadow of the Bat and a lot of like great Batman paintings. But his interiors were masterfully drawn, and they kind of fall into that Alex Toth is another influence. That Alex Toth area where I used to think that Stelfreeze's pages were incredibly detailed. And then what I realized was that he draws very simple, he simplifies things, but he draws a full, rich world. If he draws a bookcase, he's going to draw things on the bookcase. He will draw them all simply. He's not going to render the shit out of them. But he'll say, okay, here's a picture. Here's a stack of books. Here's some folders. And then he'll draw a desktop. He'll draw a desktop with a computer on it, a blotter, a cup full of pencils. And he's not rendering and doing shading and all that stuff. But he draws a very full, rich world. So I would say in terms of my influences, that would also include, Stelfreeze. And then Mark Schultz, his draftsmanship is just immaculate. I have his the series of art books that he did. I think it's just called Various Drawings, and I think he did 5 of them. So, and those are just great for looking at somebody who draws comic book fantasy illustration. It's beautiful. It's realistic without being photorealism. It's kind of like imaginative realism, like what James Gurney talks about. It definitely has that feeling of this could be real, even though it's completely fantasy, but it's also not photorealistic. He creates an authentic reality. So yeah, that's a long way to think of me going through all of my my influences. And so art with Osir, I believe that's how you pronounce it. I might be butchering it, and I apologize. But he says, I loved figure drawing and still would love to do it today. It's hard to find time, but yeah. Even if you go to Crocus Cafe on YouTube, they have videos of figure drawing poses, and I may end up popping in on some of those since I'm going to be missing classes for a couple of weeks. Mighty Geek Studios says we all have those. I presume we're talking about influences. We might also be talking about missing figure drawing. Art with Osir says, yeah, I volunteered for one of those their conventions in the early 90s. I still have my Hero t-shirt. Oh, we're talking conventions, like Hero and Wizard. This is, I still have my Hero t-shirt this day. Yeah, I don't know if I have any issues of Hero magazine. I did have some fan art published in Hero magazine sometime in the 90s. They had a contest for redesigning Superman's costume. But at a certain point, I was going through a bunch of old magazines and books, and I found that, and I looked at the drawing, and it was one of those things where looking at it now as an adult, I'm like, there's no reason for me to save this. This is horrible. So I didn't, yeah, maybe I should have saved it just because it was having some of my first artwork published in a magazine, but it was just not very good. So I ditched it. Mighty Geek Studios says, this is why tracing paper is your best friend. That's back to flipping drawings. Yeah, I love to use vellum because it's a little thicker than tracing paper. But yeah, it does the same thing as tracing paper. I just use vellum because if I used tracing paper, I would destroy it with all the drawing and erasing. But yeah, vellum's the same stuff. I use vellum, and that's why I do my layouts on vellum, so that way I don't have to, I'm not anti-Lightbox, but I did find that after using it for drawing my first graphic novel, my eyes started to hurt looking through the light. So I started doing all of my my layouts on, I pencil them on vellum, and then I flip them, do corrections, and I scan in the corrections. I turn that to a light blue and print that out to Bristol for me to ink. So that's sort of my my creative process. Iron Rocks says simplify. I'm sure that applies both from Toth and from Stelfreeze. Draw to Write says, I love figure drawing too. You're inspiring me to try and find some classes that I can sit in on. My drawing sucks. I need to improve my comics. You know what? Don't beat yourself up. But the fact that you know you want to improve, that's the important thing. And yeah, you know what? Just do a Google search for figure drawing and your zip code or your postal code, and you can probably find a workshop somewhere near you. And if you can't, maybe you get on Facebook and you can start a group of people, find people in your area that would be interested in starting a figure drawing workshop. Maybe you can hire a model. And I know other people who have not been able to find figure drawing workshops in their area, so they hired a model and they got people together and they figured out how much it's going to cost to hire the model, and everyone chipped in. So hopefully you can find something in your area, but if you can't, then maybe you have to be the one to start it. Mighty Geek says, Draw to Write says that Mighty Geek have tracing paper will travel. Yes, that's one of the big benefits, is the mobility of it. Art with Oscar says that he's Osir says, I am subscribed to that channel, Crocus Cafe. Umut is in the chat, says, hey, how you doing? Art with Osir says, I didn't realize how some of the popular, I didn't realize how had some of the bad art was in the 90s, or how bad some of the popular art was in the 90s. I think that's what he was saying. Autocorrect. It's a pain in the ass, I know. That's why I wish I should have put out my stuff back then. Well, you know what? We don't have a time machine, but you have knowledge. And I always say that you can turn that whole, my drawing sucks thing, you can turn it into a positive by looking at saying, oh, I want to learn to be better. That's the way I look at it. I look at it as a positive, putting work in. Me, I'm sitting here, I'm not a master draftsman. I'm sitting here, I'm studying my drawings from figure drawing class. I'm trying to take knowledge of anatomy and apply that to the same poses. You know, all you can do is work to get better. And the point is I'm still not a master draftsman. I didn't start this video being a master draftsman. I'm not ending it a master draftsman. But I feel like the studying I did here and here, I'm just a tiny bit better than I was at the start of the day. And if you stick with it, if you keep going, each day you get a little bit better and a little bit better. Some people improve by leaps and bounds. Some people improve in tiny drips and drabs. And you don't really have control over that. You don't have control over, you have control over how many hours you spend working and what you choose to study. But beyond that, it's up to the universe. So just put in the work and grow and learn and try to enjoy the process. Art with Osier says, now 20 plus years later, all of my bad drawings would be done. I definitely feel the same way. I didn't even start taking figure drawing classes like I had taken classes before, but I didn't dedicate myself to it until I was probably late 20s. So I'd been well out of college for several years, and then I was realizing, wow, I still don't know how to draw very well. And if I would be much further along if I'd started sooner, but I'm at where I am now. I'm still working and growing and learning, and I'm going to continue for the rest of my life. So I think that's ending the video on a high note. Thank you, everybody, for all the great comments. This was a really super active chat. I had fun talking with all you guys. I appreciate all the great input and the great questions. Thank you so much. So if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to see extra bonus videos, I do a bonus live stream once a month on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/GERIMI. I also post 2 exclusive blog posts a week that are Patreon exclusive, that are more behind the scenes content, along with 2 more public blog posts that are posted a week early for Patreon subscribers. If you go to comics.jeremy.net, you can read some of my comic books. And if you go to amazon.jeremy.net, you can buy comics. And Iron Rocks pops in there, the chat real quick, said, don't forget to like the video. Yes, please. If you enjoy these, like, share, subscribe if you're not subscribed to the channel. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Art with Osier. Umet, I'm sorry you were late, but hey, when I wrap this up, I'm going to end it. You can go back and watch the replay. And Draw to Write, he says, right on, Jeremy. You're an awesome muse. I am flattered by that. I am humbled by that. Thank you guys for spending time with me.